Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome. It's Thursday. Today we're going to jump into Rhino and kind of get going with Rhino full blast. Does anyone have any questions before we begin about, Rhino, stuff in general, whatever? Yes?
Is there a way to precisely adjust the dimensions of something without having to is there a dial I can type in the dimensions I want without having to mess around with mouse movements?
Yes. Do you want to know what it is? Okay. Yeah. So it's possible that you might want to ask me after class for if you have a specific thing that you want me to sit in front of. But if I just start up Rhino here for a second, we can start with that. We're going to cover it during our talk today. So actually, why don't we just do that? And then if you still have any questions after today, I have time after class. Anybody else? That was a great question, by the way. Anybody? All right. Let me make sure that I'm recording because it looks like several people are relying on the recording. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm sort of just selecting one of these templates. It's not totally necessary for you to select a template, but one of the reasons that you would select a template is because it comes with units. So if you're not familiar with thinking about units, what are units of measurement? Well, typically you're going to see those represented in metric or in English, like feet and inches. If you're planning on actually building something in the physical world, and you're not using really high-end engineering equipment, I would recommend that you work in feet and inches. If you are building something in the physical world and you happen to be an engineering student who's working with precision milling equipment and things like that, I would consider using the metric system because most of those software systems work in metric. And then, of course, it's just if you're making something for a virtual environment or like a gaming environment, this is kind of a bold claim, but I'm going to stand by it, that units are pretty much irrelevant because you don't need to know whether something is an inch or a millimeter. You just need to know that it's maybe I'm 5 units and this room is like 20 units. And so all you really need is that sort of, generic unit to differentiate things from each other. So that being said, I think I'm going to go for small objects, inches, as my template, and just create a new model from there. I'm going to deploy my glasses. Okay. So we're sort of in this empty model, and we got a chance last class to kind of play a little bit with some of the multi-touch features. I'm going to go over pretty much all of that. So again, with multi-touch features, the 4-port viewport layout that you get, these 3, the top, the front, and the right, all behave the same in terms of the multi-touch gestures. So here I can do 2 fingers on a trackpad to make it pan, and I can do the squeezy thing, the sort of squeeze and pinch thing there, and that's going to be able to help me navigate all 3 of these. We can also do the squeezy pinch thing in the perspective view, but the 2-finger drag in perspective actually looks a little different. It becomes what's called the orbit function. And so let's say, for example, you are working on a device where you don't have access to multi-touch. Wow, you could use not wow, that's totally common. It's called a desktop computer. There's a page on the course website where you can find Mac and PC shortcuts. And those are really more for when you're using a 3-button mouse or just using a keyboard and a mouse. Personally, my ideal setup for Rhino and for 3D work in general in any 3D app is to use a 3-button mouse. And there is an actual reason why I use the 3-button mouse. And then I also usually use a large sort of screen because this has the same sort of problem that Adobe apps have where there's just a lot going on and a lot to see, so it sometimes helps to just spread things out a little bit. One of the reasons I use a 3-button mouse, and I sometimes even will carry one around with my laptop if I'm doing a lot of modeling, is because using the trackpad constantly like this is just ergonomically like hell on your wrists. So if you're using, Rhino like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, which, maybe you're working on a big project or you're just like really working really hard, you might want to consider getting a 3-button mouse because it's ergonomically far superior. You can actually move your arm a bit. So you can find all that stuff there regarding shortcuts and interface stuff. A couple of other things I wanted to point out. If you are using a 3-button mouse or using some sort of other setup, all of the things that we just did with the multi-touch like this, there's an actual sort of tool for it, and that's up here in this sort of top bar. You can see here's the pan tool, and you can use it just like a tool. And then, of course, the orbit tool. I wouldn't recommend using the orbit tool in the top view like I'm doing right now, because guess what? That is no longer a top view. So this actually brings us to one point, which is going to be super useful probably for you heading into doing more stuff, which is how do we sort of reset this back to the top view? So on pretty much every viewport, you can control click, and you should be able to go to this set view and then set it back to the top view. And of course, it may not be immediately obvious like why you would need to have like a top view, but if you're, let's say, working on modeling this desk or this podium, there would be a big difference between like looking at it like this and being able to select all 4 points versus looking at it, from above and having kind of full access to it. So how you set up, the views actually kind of matters a lot. So let's see. So yeah, there's a bunch of tools up here. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but they basically replicate what you can do with multi-touch or various right-click options. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be working through sort of a little bit of a laundry list of, I'm just going to delete stuff as I take care of it, a little bit of a laundry list of like basic functions in Rhino. And we sort of got started with that yesterday, but we're going to kind of really get into it today. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just sort of draw a box, a 3-dimensional box. Also, maybe another good word to describe this box would be a solid box. So I'm just going to click on the box thing, which just to show you it's right here. This whole menu, you can see each one of these little tools has like a huge fly-out menu. This entire menu is a list of solids. So these are all shapes that are going to be solid. They're going to have the ability to hold sort of like light and shadow. Also, if you care about this, they would all be 3D printable because they're solid. So we'll talk about 3D printing again, probably in a future lecture, but just know that it's kind of in the background. So if we go to the sort of box thing, one thing I would point out, and this is also something that could certainly affect the scale, this is like a baby answer to your scale question, is that when you create the object, you have the option of basically creating a scale. So here, if we click here, we can actually type in here a number. And pretty much any one of these arguments in the functions that are contained in these this icon set here, pretty much every single one of these allows you to put numerical input on this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just make a 1-by-1 cube, and then we can look at maybe scaling it through other means, aside from just assigning it the scale that you want it while you're there. So I'm going to just start from the beginning, start it here at 0, 0. It's not super important that you start at 0, 0, but it can be helpful depending on what you're doing. And then here, I also want to point out that you can see right now how the grid is set up. So it looks like right now our grid, if you look at this bottom part right here, these numbers down here, those, you can see that if we go 1 unit into the grid, we're at 0.25 by 0.25, right? So basically what has happened, because we chose the inches template, it came with what's called a kind of a quadrial grid. So it's 1 inch is every major grid line, which is the sort of thickened grid line, and then every 1/4 inch is the sort of intermediary point, or the sort of, you know, baby measurement. So if we just type 1 in here, you can see it has sort of set itself on 1. And if we want to go a little bit into a different direction with it and say, okay, we want 1 for the width as well, and then for the height, let's go ahead and say 1 for the height as well. And so that's pretty much, you know, what we expected. And you can see that now it's like a 1 by 1 cube. So we'll come back to sort of like taking this cube and maybe scaling it in a precise way. That's definitely something we can do today. And then just a couple of other sort of things that you might want to check out. One is the gumball. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in class using the gumball because I think it's kind of distracting and kind of confusing, but some people really like it, so I'm going to show you how it works. So the gumball is sort of a feature that when you have a shape selected, it basically puts transformation tools around the object that you have selected. So you could grab this part and you just drag and hold, and it'll drag it this way. This will drag it this way. You can drag it up. You can also rotate it on certain axes. So you can see right now we're rotating it against the top. And then, of course, that also works from really any angle that you can kind of get in there and rotate it. So some people think that the gumball is awesome. I just think it's really visually distracting, but and I find that it actually gets in the way more than anything. But you can easily turn it on and off. So that's one kind of nice thing to know. Up here, you can just toggle it because it's really just, you know, an optional part of the interface. So I'm going to undo those transformations just so we don't have our cube rotated anymore. Let's talk a little bit about, let me check out my list for a second here. We got the gumball. Okay, we talked about solids as much as we're going to talk about them today. Let's talk a little bit more about the interface. I know that it's a little tedious because we're not like sort of making stuff happen right now, but all this interface stuff is really, it's kind of critical to your future success. So you can see I just sort of like clicked and dragged this object. And I have grid snap enabled now, so you can see it really nicely just kind of fit in another unit, and it just snapped there, right? Like on the grid. Oh, sweet, beautiful, like just right. So definitely having the grid snap on is something that I find super useful. Sometimes you actually don't want the grid snap, like if you want to make a really nice freeform curve, or if you want to make something that just doesn't really have anything to do with the grid, then turn it off. But for the most part, I like to keep it on. And there are all kinds of reasons why you would turn it off. We'll kind of get into that as they come up. Now, we're going to go through the whole rest of this panel here, as exhausting as that might be. So the next thing I want to talk about is ortho. And so right now, you can see we can drag our sort of form in any way, right? Well, not quite any way. It looks like right now it's limiting it to a flat plane. So from whether we're on the front or whatever, it's kind of keeping it planar. So it's sort of automatically enabling what would normally be enabled with planar, which basically is that when you move this over here in one viewport, so let's say we want to move this from here to here in the top view, when planar is enabled, there's 0 chance of your form doing this. Because you can see it's like in the same spot, right? But it's actually higher. Yes, hello.
Does the method
Nothing. So the PC version should have all of the same elements. They're in slightly different places. Like, so for example, this grid orthoplanar is actually down here in the PC version. Is it there? Oh, good. OK. Yeah, so as far as your command sort of function maybe not working, that might be something to talk to me about after class, because that might be something where we have to adjust your workspace a little bit. But yes, I can assure you that the PC version has the same interface for functions, because, yeah, I use it often. So yeah, it might just be like a configuration issue that we can take care of. Any other questions? OK, so as I was saying, when you move this thing around, like it's good to know, like I want this to stay planar. It's probably, if you find yourself like having problems with things popping up in other viewports. So let me add another box in here just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. So I just specified the units kind of manually, starting with 0, and then I did one height, one for each of the other units. So right now, we've got these two pieces that are sort of somewhat related. There's another thing, and this is kind of like the big thing that I want to explain, is called the O snap. And so the O snap is kind of related to all three of these other snaps. So down here, this is the O snap menu. And you can see it's just got a bunch of sort of selections. Right now, it looks like I have the O snap disabled. So if I go to disable all over there, and so now I have some of these things enabled. It used to be, by the way, that there was actually an O snap entry in this part of the menu, but they got rid of it because they just basically decided that they have this sort of standalone menu. So basically what that means, when you have the object snap activated, it means you can set points in the model to snap to. So can everybody see what's happening right now? How when I want to move this, it's sort of like moving towards the object, and it's basically selecting points on the object that I can snap to. That's a great thing if you want things to like fit together. So here, these are the sort of points that I've selected to snap to. So one would be the end point. So an end point is literally just like the end of a line. So if you have a 3D shape, that should be pretty much any corner should have an end point. So you can grab it here, and then you can just sort of, it magnetizes to the other object. And so as you start to build more complicated forms, the O snap is like super critical, because that's what makes things fit together. Also, I get questions a lot about, like, what's the point of these stupid snaps? They seem like a lot of work. Why should I even bother? Well, yeah, that's a fair criticism. They do make things a lot more complicated. I'll show you why they matter. So let's say I want to stick this box. I'm going to get rid of all my snaps. I'm going to disable the O snap. And let's say I want to just put these together, okay, without a snap. So, all right, I know I have glasses, so that looks just about right. I mean, it's as close as I can get. Let's zoom in on them. Well, it looks like my glasses are really doing the trick, because these look really perfect. But I can absolutely guarantee you that if we went to the maximum of the magnification, that these are not actually touching. Okay, so they're not touching mathematically. Why does that matter? because this is a software program. And basically, Rhino has tons and tons of functions where you can do stuff to stuff, but it has to be touching. So that's kind of one of Rhino's things, right? And so that's kind of the reason I'm talking about it right now, because it does matter a lot. It also matters a lot if you ever want to do anything like 3D printing or anything where, see, my pinchy hand is already getting tired. I need a 3-button mouse. Yeah, so it does matter. So enough about that. Let's sort of get into this sort of flow portion of this. I'm going to be coming back to snaps and grids a lot. Because it's really the main way that you control how to draw in Rhino. And so as we build stuff, that's in the next sort of 6 units, that's going to be what we're talking about the most. Not the most, but I mean, we're going to be doing it every single demo probably. So now you can see I basically have these 2 cubes, right? And I can select them together like I could probably in an Adobe app or something like that. Let me show you another fun trick with Rhino. So you may notice that I'm selecting both of these objects by drawing a backwards window, right? So I'm only partially hiding one of them. Check that out. If you go in the other direction, it privileges a different selection routine. Bet you never realized that. That works in Adobe apps too, by the way. So yeah, if you draw your box sort of backwards, it'll select anything that is touching the window. This would be hundreds of objects. And then if you make the box this way, it'll be only objects that are completely within the box. Oh, I used Rhino for 10 years before I figured that out. So it's a good trick. So yeah, now we have 2 of these objects. Probably the first thing I would do if I wanted to sort of build something more complicated would be I would probably just cut and paste them, right? So I'm going to cut and paste. Again, I have no snaps right now. So at the minimum, it would probably be a good idea to bring the grid snap back. And then because my shape happens to line up with the grid, I can kind of replicate it that way. So, okay, I mean, yeah, you can definitely replicate these things and move them around, and that's cool. But what happens if I want to take all of these forms and scale them up, or maybe if I wanted to scoosh them, flatten them, or really do anything to them, rotate them, whatever. I can't right now because they're all independent shapes. So probably the best thing to do right now would be to make a group. And so Rhino supports groups, and they work pretty much like groups in Adobe. So you just have to select all of the things, and then you just click this little group thing right here. Okay. And then go ahead and replicate it. And you can do that infinitely. You can also have groups inside of groups. So if we wanted to just group this again, then let's say we're tired of this group and we want to get rid of it. We could click the ungroup button, and then we're still left with the 2 groups that were inside of it, right? So it has that sort of hierarchical structure, if you wish. Yeah, another couple of things that I wanted to make sure to show you. Of course, we did already sort of look at the gumball, which is one way that you can move stuff around. It's very, as you can see, it's very sort of catered towards interactive nudging. You can give it a value, but I wouldn't really recommend using the gumball for anything where you need a great deal of precision. So let's take this object and let's just move it. Let's move it over here. So obviously, I can just do that by clicking and dragging it, right? But let's say, hypothetically, that we wanted to do it really precisely. So what I would do is I would use the Move tool, which is right here. And you select the objects to move. Center. You press the point to move from. And so this is going to be sort of like your anchor point for the object. So I'm going to just do the lower corner here. And then your point to move to, you can either just type the point in here, or you can obviously do it interactively. Let's go ahead and just type the point in to see what would happen. So one thing that you can do when you're in Rhino, if you don't really have a lot of familiarity with the coordinate system and you need a little bit of assistance, where I am right now, I can look down here at those numbers and get some idea of like what the coordinates are like. So it looks like over there I'm at like 36 by 36. Okay, so let's just try to move it to 36, 36. If you're specifying your coordinates mathematically, you definitely want to leave a comma and hit enter. And so there it is, just exactly what we told it to do. So let's go ahead and let's take this other thing over here and let's do some scaling. So as promised before, we could certainly use the gumball for this. I kind of already showed you what the gumball was all about. Personally, I would use the scale function here. And so Rhino, this can be a little bit confusing. Rhino has 3 or 4 different scale functions. So there's 2D, there's 3D, there's 1D, and then there's non-uniform. Pretty much, you're using scale 3D. If you just want to make something, if you have something and it's in 3D and you want to make it bigger, you use scale 3D. If there are other sort of like considerations, like if you want to take something that maybe, like this happens to me all the time when I take photographs of myself. I want to just take myself and make myself like a little bit taller, but like keep everything else the same, you know? That's a non-uniform scale. And so yeah, there's just all sorts of like, other ways that you can scale things so that it's not just kind of one-to-one. But for 95% of the reasons why you would want to scale stuff, the scale 3D should work. So that's just a left click here. And then you give it a base point and a scale factor. So this can be kind of confusing to people. The scale factor is really just like a good way of telling Rhino how big it is now, so that you can control how big it will be in the future. So for example, a scale factor of 1 would be literally how big it is now. So if I take the top of this object, that's a scale factor of 1. And then a scale factor of 2 would be to bump it up to this level, right? So in terms of mathematical sort of, approaches, you can't really give it a scale factor. It asks for a reference point. So unfortunately, I guess you'd have to sort of like do the slight mental work of figuring out what, if it were a certain size, what point it would land at. So here, in this case, if we want to make it twice as large, it looks like that's about like a y of 3 and an x of 5. So I'll go ahead and just type that in. So there's a 5, 3. I didn't like that at all. Hang on. That's because I had my mouse in the wrong part. Try that one more time. So yeah, so here we would say, let's see. Right, so in that case, it's 3, 7, puts us up at a double scale. So in any case, if you have sort of like more questions about scaling, I'm happy to chat and kind of nerd out after class, but that's sort of like the basic introduction. Honestly, usually I scale stuff interactively because I'm mostly concerned about things being the right size in relationship to each other, right, or to other objects in the scene. So I actually kind of do it more like, yeah, that looks about right, and then that's fine. So let me see on the list here. Move. Oops. So rotation is another sort of topic that I want to make sure that I cover. And rotation definitely is something that we can kind of, it can be a little bit confusing for people, I think, in Rhino. So I'm going to take this object, which is pretty much like, one of the reasons that this object is good for doing what we're doing right now is that if it were completely symmetrical, it would be really difficult to tell, like, kind of what we're doing to it. So when we rotate it, it should be pretty obvious. So half the problem that I've encountered with students who are using Rhino and kind of getting confused about rotation is that in order to rotate things in Rhino, you have to really kind of know exactly what you want. I mean, sure, you can experiment, but it's helpful to just like be able to kind of formulate the request. So let's say I want to take this flat thing and I want to lift it up like here. So this face is basically flat right here. Okay? So it just so happens that that looks like the right viewport. So basically, I want to take this sort of block and just do this. Whoop. Take it 90 degrees up. So I could use the gumball for this, but I'm going to show you a different way of doing it. I'm going to show you how to use the actual rotate tool. So here's the rotate tool. It's right by the scale tool. So the first thing you do is you find a center of rotation. And in this case, it's going to be the corner of the box, right? And then it asks you to find an angle or a first reference point. And so that, again, just like the scale function, that's asking you basically, where is it now? What am I moving it in relation to? Or what am I rotating it in relation to? Like, so that happens to be sort of like, I think, here, since we want to go in this direction, right? So let's go ahead and just pop a point there. And then your second reference point is where the actual sort of rotation comes up. And so the second reference point in this case is just like right there. But that's basically, in a nutshell, how rotation works in Rhino. So one of the big challenges there is that you two things. One, you have to actually do it in the right viewport, right? Because if you try to rotate that here, like, you're not able to. Because if you drew a circle here, I mean, let's just try it. If we did the same approach from this viewport, it's like, yeah, no, that's not so much, right? That's not what we're looking for. So I think that just kind of like taking a minute to like really think about what you want to do before you rotate is probably a good idea. And then, let's see, other things. So so the last thing is view modes. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes and sort of thinking about this like Rhino modules galore assignment that is posted on the course website. I would really consider taking these modules and just kind of running with it. So I'm going to try to make something in the next 11 minutes. So first of all, I think instead of using a box, I'm going to try to make something a little more exciting, maybe like a pyramid. And I'm going to probably go ahead and just do it as like a from 0, 0, like really simple sort of object here. Again, do you have to start on 0, 0? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So here's a couple of tricks. So I'm going to go ahead and just like move this. And then we can have a couple more. And I'm just going to build up like a little grid for myself here. And then maybe grab these. And put them up here. You can see that pretty much I'm doing all of this through the grid snap and not using the object snaps. That's because we're lining up with the grid. If you weren't lining up with the grid, it probably would be a good idea to consider maybe using the grid snap, the object snaps. So, okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and start to like maybe go off script here. So I'm gonna grab one of these objects. I'm gonna cut and paste it first because I always forget to cut. And so, all right, well, so I think instead of having this just be like a flat surface, that sounds kind of boring, I think I'm gonna try to rotate this part of the thing into like a little bit of a shape. So here, center of rotation here, anything that sort of defines the rotation, but also it's sort of like about how you personally want to measure the rotation. So usually, if I know that I want to rotate it like from here, I try to attach the first reference point to what's sort of closest to what I'm actually rotating. So maybe come down here a little bit. And then we can grab this, cut and paste this. And now this would be a great situation for object snap. Again, we're just super lucky that we're hitting those targets. There's no kind of guarantee that that would happen. So I'm going to grab these also. And I'm going to just kind of keep going with this a little bit. So now we can come in here to the perspective view, and we can see we've got something a little bit more exciting than just like a very flat surface. And we could probably take this at this point and make a sort of secondary surface out of it. So let's say we'll take this whole thing. I'm just going to show you early a little bit, like probably my very favorite tool in Rhino. It's called the copy tool. And you may think, oh, maybe it just copies and pastes. Oh, no, it does much more exciting things. So you grab this, grab one of these objects, and so it says point to copy from is there. And you can basically like just kind of copy this as many times as you want to kind of build out, and you could build in a whole environment with it. So it's just like a really great way to kind of like make a lot of something really quickly. And then, of course, we're always super pressed for time, but like, it could be sort of interesting to just like play with these as floating things, or you could take them all and make them individual by selectively deleting some parts, or I don't know, just kind of have fun with it. So I think that probably like kind of winds up like what we would want to do for the modules galore assignment. The one other thing that I wanted to just mention regarding Rhino was that, of course, you also have the sort of option of having a different rendering view. So if you double-click press on multi-touch, or you can just right-click the right-click menu, and then you can give it, some different rendering modes that are potentially a little bit better. For the modules galore assignment, and also for the impossible object assignment, I'm not going to be asking you to render. So don't worry about color or texture or any of that stuff. It's really just all about form. And what you're doing with form. Okay, and then I have one little announcement actually from the university. So I don't know how many of you are signed up for the Digital Studies certificate. Some of you might already be signed up for it, but they are hoping, I think, that people will declare, because I think they have a certain number of students that might even be in this room that are undeclared. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, I would just check out the Digital Studies website and get in touch with their advisor. And of course, obviously, this course satisfies a requirement for the certificate, so you're already on your way. So before I wrap up, does anyone have any sort of additional questions about Rhino? It sounds like we have to maybe do one fix-up, but anybody else? Okay, cool. Well, I'll be here. If you need any technical assistance with Rhino, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to the TAs. Okay? Have a fantastic weekend, by the way.
You too.
Thank you.